The purpose being that a lot of people ask, they say they can't join us and want to enjoy the talk, and therefore we've undertaken to record them all, and we have developed a YouTube channel, CVER Swansea, and you're welcome to go and see our talks there or listen to our talks, and please don't forget to ring the bell and subscribe. Okay, so welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us, giving us the pleasure of your company this this lovely Wednesday. This is I think the fourth now in our series of public lectures, Revisiting. We are Swansea University, and our centre is called the Centre for Visitor Economy Research. And one of the reasons we are running this series is not only because, of course, the dreaded COVID has prevented us from having our usual visiting speakers come to talk to us and our students, but also because we wanted to create a bit of noise to let everybody know that we have got a new master's course in international tourism management starting in September. So if you know anybody who's looking for a master's course and would like to have a think about coming to the wonderful city of Swansea in Wales, then please pass on the message. Okay, so that's the adverts over. To say big thank you to Carol Kline for joining us today and for agreeing to give this public lecture. A few words about Carol first to introduce everybody to her. Carol is from Walker College of Business at Appalachian, I'm never sure quite which one, State University. Is it Appalachian or Appalachian?
Depends on where you live in the States. In the southern part, it's Appalachian. If you're like Virginia and above, it's Appalachian. Okay, and I'm from Wales, so yeah, okay. So whatever, Appalachian University, State University. Thank you to Carol for joining us. For those of you who don't know Carol well, and I realize that many of us will, but Carol's research interests focus broadly on tourism planning and the development of tourism sustainability, but they do cover a range of other topics like foodie segmentation, craft beverages, agri-tourism, and of course, animal welfare in tourism, which is the subject we've managed to corner her on today to talk about. And that's very welcome, because I know that you've got, Carol, a lot of interesting stuff to talk about. One of the things I want to give another plug, another advert for, is your wonderful organization called Fanimal. Fanimal.online, you will find it. And this is great. Fanimal is a socially minded organization focused on animals, providing original content on a variety of topics delivered through web-based platforms. Their mission is to inform and mobilize animal lovers, that's fans of animals, so that animal suffering can be reduced. And I was having a little look around it this morning to remind myself what was there. And I was really impressed by fabulous infographics you've got there, which I'm definitely going to poach for some of my lectures. You had an infographic on dolphinariums, which I thought was great, and some other ones as well, which were brilliant. And also a very neat animals in tourism video series as well. Short clips talking about animals in tourism and the ethical issues that go with it. So just to big up Fanimal and to say, Carol, I thank you for doing that. I think that's absolutely great. And thank you for agreeing to give us this lecture today. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to you. Oh, thanks, Brian. Thanks for giving Fanimal those props. We have 7 interns this summer. We had 3 this past spring. We had 16 last summer. We have a fellowship program. So I say all that because the animals and tourism videos that you just referred to were done by our interns last year. We really are focusing on young people who want animal-focused careers, and that is such a wide variety of things. And it, of course, overlaps with tourism, which we'll be talking about today. Thank you so much for asking me to come. I have enjoyed the speakers that I have heard thus far. I'm so glad you have them on YouTube. Thank you to the School of Management at Swansea University. And I know there are a lot of people behind the scenes planning this series. So thank you very much to everyone. I wish I were
in the point of my career where I wanted to get a master's in international tourism management, because coming to a new program would be very, very exciting to be a part of that. And kudos on the very clever banner of revisiting the world. I love that banner for the public lecture series, and I think it's most appropriate. I do think we need to rethink our relationship with animals. I want to start with why. It's not what's known as a tame problem, a linear problem. It's not even a complex problem. Complex problems can't be solved with traditional analytics or reductionist type of thinking. It is clearly a wicked problem. And I know this phrase may be passé or so obvious. Maybe it's so much so that it's not used a lot in the tourism literature. I haven't seen it, but I think it's most appropriate here. And so I feel like we do need to re-examine and rethink our relationship with animals, because it's a big problem. It's a problem that we need to deal with. Problems come in all kinds of classifications with lots of impacts. There's different urgencies and there's different complexities. And the wicked problems have the most complexity of all. In fact, when you're trying to get your hands around a wicked problem, you may not even know what the goal is. We have systems upon systems of wicked problems within the world. And what makes them a problem, obviously, is they all interact with one another. I do like, though, that people are classifying what a wicked problem is. They don't have a set number of potential solutions. We don't even know how many solutions there could be to our problem with animals. Every problem within a wicked problem is a symptom of another problem. Now, if that didn't make sense, that's right. It's a complexity. It's a web of webs. And there's always more than one explanation for a wicked problem, which we're going to get into today, because the explanations vary so much upon individual perspectives. In terms of classifying our problem with animals, and I'm not even really speaking specifically about tourism at the moment, just generally our human problem with non-human animals. It's a moral one. It's ethical. It's philosophical. It's definitely cultural, social, political, environmental, geospatial. Just to look briefly at the general scope of our problem with animals, we use them for all kinds of things. Now, this has been well documented in the tourism context recently, and I'm going to take a small dip into the tourism literature to look at how it's been covered. But again, these bullets here, this isn't tourism specific. This is just our general use of animals. I would say, other than testing or research on animals, every single one of these bullets you can apply to the tourism industry. There hasn't been a lot written about ecosystem services, but animals play a very big role in what we consider the destination, the backdrop of where our experiences occur. And, I'll give an example of behavioral artifacts. Dogs have particular instincts. And so we have field trials for herding dogs that is part of a tourism experience. The literature has given a lot of attention to entertainment and performances and the transport and physical labor part of our relationship with animals within tourism. And recently we've started talking about food and how animals as food, especially as regional delicacies, are a part of the tourism experience. This one I feel is important. because food and our interactions with animals throughout the world is a problem, and it's causing lots of environmental issues that we are all familiar with. Whoops, that's the slide I want. So just going a little bit more into detail of the scope of how our use of animals figures within the tourism context, I've listed out some more specific types of experiences. If this were an interactive class, I would want to have a discussion about these. But within each of these, even though they're getting more specific than the previous slide of how we use animals, you can see that they cover vast industries in and of themselves. Hunting, carrying gear, hawkers and street vendors. That's where the whole animal selfie phenomenon has come on. Racing, that could be dog racing, camel racing, horse racing, so many different types of things within each of these bullets. And so I just put this up here to again provide the scope of what we're talking about. We're talking about elephants and tigers and swordfish and grasshoppers and roosters and snakes and gorillas and orangutans and lions and fireflies and bats and vinca and alpaca and dogs and domestic cats and giraffe and puffin and alligator and dolphin and bear, and I could go on and on and on. These are just a very small part of what animals we are using in tourism currently. And so apart from animal welfare, what's the big deal? What's the problem? I am gonna take a second here to read to you a little bit because these linkages that animals in tourism have with other things in the world are complex, and I want to make sure I capture them well. The world now faces some interlocking existential crises. And this is including the rise of nationalism all over the world, outcomes from climate change, and critical vulnerabilities in public health. And within the intersection of these crises, we see a lot of areas where animals are effective and that they relate to tourism. So for example, humans hunt, eat, and trap wildlife, bushmeat, for consumption. However, the unsustainable demand has given rise to wildlife markets, which have been demonstrated to provide grounds for disease to spread among wildlife. Some of this unsustainable demand is driven by restaurants in urban areas, as well as other supply chains like animal hides that go on to become shoes and belts and wallets and suitcases. So just within that example alone, we see how our use of animals ties in with tourism, but it ties in with several other supply chains, as well as public health crises, as well as the economic livelihoods of people doing the trapping and the hunting. Zoonotic diseases are passed from non-human animals to humans, and then humans, travelers, further spread that disease. Stefan Gosling did such a great job of discussing that in his presentation in this public series. As we face the sixth mass extinction of wildlife, the loss of any species at all threatens the balance of our ecosystems, which is they're already not doing very well. And wildlife trafficking of both endangered and threatened species for medicinal, culinary, medicinal and culinary consumption is linked to tourism. So medicinal, I think of examples of bear bile, tiger blood, pangolin scales. Those aren't something happening out there outside of tourism. They're very much linked to tourism, just as culinary delicacies are as well. Pangolin meat, shark fin soup, those are examples that are in the news quite a lot. And the unsustainable, unhygienic, and unethical farming of non-endangered animals, okay, I'm talking about cattle raised for beef, pigs raised for pork, geese raised for foie gras, and then high demand fish and crustacean caught or raised for seafood. That degrades the environment and it risks the health of the people who consume it. Farm workers and slaughterhouse workers are forced to work in poor conditions that we've seen in the United States a lot. It was in the news here about how that slaughterhouse context spread COVID quite rapidly. Tourism is a part of all that. That meat, that poultry, that everything that's being produced in the slaughterhouse, part of that is going to people eating in restaurants. Part of that is going to tourists, especially in normal times when we are traveling. The slaughterhouse conditions are just dangerous. And so we can see again through the supply chain of tourism, if we are choosing to eat those things as we eat out, as we travel, we are affecting people's lives down the supply chain, who most likely work in conditions that we would certainly not want to work in. Varied types of visitor merchandise come from animal parts. Some of these are endangered. Included are not only the well-documented trophy kills, but also smaller and less overt souvenirs, such as live animal keychains. Live animal keychains, yuck. Animal dependency on tourism has been documented within the last year or two because of COVID, but certainly, and on a positive note, the resilience and the rewilding and the regenerative processes that nature has gone through because of COVID has also been documented as well. But beyond these issues of welfare, environment, and just in general, thinking that humans are at the top of the supply chain and that we're better and smarter and more powerful than any other species. And apart from the fact that we have a neoliberal capitalistic ethos driving a lot of what we do, there are other issues within this problem of how we interrelate to animals. Certainly increased demand of animals in all of the forms that I just discussed leads to increased production. When production is increased, sometimes shortcuts are taken, injuries go up, disease goes up, environmental degradation gets worse. There certainly is a lot of institutionalized violence that is now condoned and just thought of as normal within the raising of food of our domestic animals. It's just okay and normal to artificially inseminate a cow, no matter what sort of pain or distress that causes. And it's also okay just to keep the cow impregnated all of her life and take away her calves once they're born. That type of violence is institutionalized. And what does that say about us as a society or as societies? Tourism marketing, we probably have all seen this in various forms, where a culture or a tradition that is authentic is taken and amplified, exaggerated even, and turned into a trinket or prostituted as a practice that you must do if you're a tourist coming to visit X region. You really have to do this cultural practice because all of the locals do it, and you're just simply not experiencing this location unless you do that practice. So that's an ethical issue, which of course ripples out into other types of problems as well. I like to ask my students whether all cultural practices should be respected. I did a fascinating study a few years ago, talking to people within the 17 to 25 year range, talking to them about issues that they might encounter when they are traveling overseas. And all of these issues had to do with eating animals. And one of the findings was there was this overwhelming sentiment of, well, you know, if I'm in a country that is doing something, I want to be respectful of that culture. And I don't want to refuse to eat something. I don't want to refuse to participate in an experience. I don't want to refuse to do these things, even though I wouldn't necessarily do them at home. And that's interesting. That's an interesting way that when we're visitors, we are perhaps leaving some of our ethics at home, or at least some of our perspectives. There's the positive side of that. We want to be able to have our minds open and take in things that are different from us. We want to learn from other cultures. But at the same time, if there's something you're seeing that doesn't quite work for your ethics, what do you do? And I'm not offering a solution here. I'm just using this as an illustration of one point of why this is a wicked problem. And then certainly religion muddies the waters. There are some cultural practices, some societal practices, and some religious practices that just aren't done anymore because overwhelmingly society has decided that it's not appropriate or it's not ethical to do such. And are we at a point where there's some other cultural practices or societal practices that we should look at? And then how do you decide? Who decides? It's certainly complex indeed. And so, you know, we look at the tourism literature. We can turn to the tourism literature to see if there's any answers on this. This is a very, very general, please forgive me, at how general this is. I'm just putting the animal-based tourism literature into big chunks to try to summarize it here. Certainly prior to the 1970s, there was a lot of discussion about hunting, fishing, wildlife tourism as conservation, and really there was discussion about how these activities were good for the economy, and there was recognition that tourism can have a negative impact on the wildlife. And this is within the tourism literature, mind you. So these things were being written about in other conservation circles, but within the tourism literature, we might have focused on the negative impact on wildlife, and then how that negative impact on wildlife then in turn affected the tourism industry economically negatively. You know, in the 80s and 90s, we saw the growth of ecotourism and animal husbandry discussion, which is cool, I think, because I did some work in agritourism, and so this is where the beginnings of that was starting. Lots of work on zoos, and that remains to this day. In the 2000s, we saw authors, scholars look at species, not just ecosystems and not just activities. And so that's interesting. There was a lot on, or not a lot, but it started to grow on whale watching and coral, which is great because we tend to leave our aquatic animals at the wayside because we focus so much on terrestrial animals. And I have, you know, the 2008 article here highlighted because these authors, this was not the earliest time, but it was one early time where animals as individuals, not the species and not an ecosystem, but animals as individuals were identified and talked about and discussed and considered. And the author said, oh, hey, maybe we should think about these animals as individuals and come up with some best practices within the framework of animal-based attractions. And one of the things that I found particularly startling about this particular article was the recommendation that animals who live in a zoo or another type of attraction have a right to privacy, that they don't need to be on display 24 hours. Fascinating. What's also fascinating about that is that was less than 15 years ago. Certainly, if you have done any work in animal ethics at all, you are familiar with David Fennell's book that came out in 2012, and that was a highlight for me. That was a game changer. Since that time, man, it absolutely it's exploded. Macono, Burns, Markwell, Bertella. I'm not gonna be able to name everybody's name, but just a few to tell you how much it's exploded. Young, Carr, Broom, Keto, Limelin, his work on insects, Bone, Bricker, Winter, Young, Jillian Rickley, Quintero Venegas and Lopez in Mexico City doing amazing things on animal tourism in Mexico and in Latin America. Harald Heemstra, Fung. Again, I'm not going to be able to capture all of the new voices, but you'll see a theme for the second half of my talk is we need to be listening to the new voices. So, why is this problem happening? Why is it such a wicked problem? Well, of course, there are an interplay of a lot of societal issues, but there's also a lot of individual issues. In order to really start to think about this problem, we have to come at it from both ways. We have to think about politics, political science. We have to think about anthrozoology. We have to think about, look at what is the sociology literature have to say about this. Psychology, I'm a psychology major, so everything boils down to psychology for me. And that's why I'm probably so fascinated with some of the individual drivers of this problem. We don't like knowing that our actions are not necessarily great for an animal, not necessarily great for the environment, not necessarily great for people down the supply chain. We don't like knowing that. And so we are so good at coming up with some coping mechanisms that help us not feel so bad about it. Bandura wrote a lot about this. I would urge anyone to go into his writings. One book in particular, I'm going to butcher the name, but it's something like Why People Do Bad Things and Are Able to Live with Themselves. I mean, I love it. Plain talk, tell us what it is. But we will avoid empathy towards people or animals that we're harming in order for us not to feel bad about it. We do have a tendency to blame others or to slough off responsibility. All of this is very, very hard stuff. And then, of course, it just comes down to the fact that we have different perspectives. I hope that I'm adequately painting the picture of why I feel this is a wicked problem. At the end of the day, this is going to simplify things way too much. But at the end of the day, people need to eat. And whether that's people choosing to eat animals, because that is traditionally what is eaten in their region, or if that means people need to leverage the use of animals for some sort of livelihood so that they can feed their family. The bottom line, people need to eat. So at this point, I want to think about what's happening now. What's happening now in the way of rethinking our relationship. And I want to think about, I also want to discuss what we can do in the future. These are efforts happening right now, addressing this wicked problem of our relationship with animals. And I'm applauding them. That's what those hands are. I am applauding these efforts. Several authors are starting to think about our relationship with animals in terms of a post-humanistic lens. And I'm really excited about what has come out in the last 3 years regarding post-humanism and our approach to animals, our approach to research with animals, our approach to animal agency, and giving animals voice within a tourism context. Outside, animal-specific actions, activities, there are large social movements that are happening, that are gaining traction, that deal with climate change and some of these other wicked problems. And I really love seeing these. Again, kudos to the young people. Both of the examples that I have up here on the slide are young people who are fed up, who are fed freaking up with people my age, and our lack of traction and tractability on what's happening. So we need to keep doing this, challenging the codes and the guidelines, right? The Sustainable Development Goals, the Global Sustainable Tourism Criteria, the United Nations Tourism Principles. They're good. They're really good. But we need to keep challenging them. And in particular, relative to animals, there's not a lot said in them. I've looked. So I commend Fanimal and some of the other people who are pushing back on these multilateral, multinational standards. And best practices, we need more of them. You know, I could go back to my slide where I listed 30 different ways that we use animals in tourism. Let's have a best practice for each one of those, at least. There are some organizations doing that now, not many, but there are some. I want to give a shout out to 2 of them in particular. Animal Experience International, fantastic B Corp, based in Canada and in the UK. They do volunteer tourism experiences all around the world that focus on animals. Love them. So happy to have been introduced to Nora Livingstone, who is one of the founders there. So look at their website, Animal Experience International. They are doing it right. They are doing animal tourism right. World Animal Protection, also a leader in that intersection between animals and tourism. They have standards of care. I believe they were the first organization to stand up and publish a animal selfie guideline. I may be wrong about that, but their guidelines around animal selfies are very good. And then there are academic examples of best practices. We have started writing about those. Yes, yay, good job. Let's keep going. There needs to be a lot more done. And then I just point to one example. Mukono does an amazing job with ethnographies and her work around the social media and the public virtual space, where both tourists, when they're writing reviews, for example, are being reflexive and thinking about what they might have done wrong and what they should do better. That's just one piece out of many she's written. But she also writes about collective consciousness and how the peer pressure factor within social media. And we also have seen some very good beginnings within Instagram, within TripAdvisor, within Airbnb, who are doing some work around infusing ethics into their platforms. I'm going to say publicly that they don't go far enough, not at all. no way. We need to go much, much farther. But there are some efforts of rethinking this problem of our relationship of animals and tourism. And, you know, thinking about the future, we have to think about this on multi-layers. We have to think about it at the government layer. How do we rethink our relationship within governments, within policies, within those multilateral agreements? I think it was Gosling's lecture, Brian, where Tassim Jamal made a really great comment about how the greatest challenge is at the structural level. I mean, many of us on this call now are doing great things in our lives. We are taking individual action, and we know students who are doing the same thing. But why is this? And we know boards of directors that are doing. We know corporations that are doing things right. We know attractions that are doing things right. We know hotels. But why is it so difficult to get things to change at that highest structural level? We need to continue to be critical of, and at the same time work with industry members. That's a fine balance, right? We need to be critical of what they're doing, while at the same time maintaining a very strong and positive relationship with them. Academia can't do this alone, and industry can't do it alone as well. Fanimal did a great public lecture series. If anyone on this call hasn't seen it yet, I do urge you to go back and watch all of the presentations, because I do feel that he's hit the nail on the head. Knowledge transferal from academia to industry isn't happening well enough, often enough, or in a manner that industry knows how to use it or can use it. And that's on us. But there's some systemic things there, because we don't really get rewarded for that, do we? We get rewarded for our teaching, we get rewarded for our scholarship, but we don't really get rewarded for the amount of change that we make within the industry. We need to think about our assumptions of animal ethics. We need to think about how a lot of times when we're talking about animal ethics or veganism, or we approach things from a philosophical point of view, we're doing so in a raced or westernized context. I think we can go further, or not even go further, but start looking at the problems, identifying the problems, mapping the problems, looking at them with the complexity that they are within the tourism literature. I think we're hitting some of the problems, but we could look at the complexities a lot better. And in that case, it would be fantastic if we could model some of the possible scenarios and possible solutions. I'm talking about, this is ideal here. If we had lots and lots of money, this is what we could be doing. I feel so strongly that we need to continue to invest in our students and our emerging scholars. One of the joys of our jobs is working with emerging scholars and students, right? By luck, I formed a recent relationship with a woman in anthrozoology in the UK. Her name is Jess Hooper. She's fantastic. She's brilliant. And she and I have so many projects outlined that are going to be exciting. I can't even tell you. So I really feel strongly about these partnerships and these mentorships and these engagements with our young scholars, but with people outside of our discipline as well. I'm really fortunate to be someone who can teach an entire class on animals and tourism. I'm not sure how many other people in the US are doing that. But I have a class that I teach once a year called Animals, Tourism, and Sustainability. And that immersive class and other immersive projects I've done within a sustainable tourism class around pangolins. I think those projects continue to make a difference. I think they make an impact on our students. There are certainly some coalitions within the tourism industry. I cannot think of the one that is very recent. It's academics taking a stand against climate change. I think that's fantastic. I want to learn more about these coalitions and the impacts that they are making, because I think that's where we should be going. That's how we should be rethinking our future relationship with animals. But in our own non-academic lives, I have to just kind of pause and mention a book that I've been reading. It's called Essentialism. And it's a good book for people like me who get very excited and very distracted by ideas. Ideas are like bright, shiny objects, and I get very excited about them. And why this is relevant here is because if you're passionate about something like animals and tourism, there's so many ideas. There's so many different things that we could try. There's so many different approaches. And within a wicked problem, you're not going to know which approach is going to make that difference. However, what this book is causing me to reflect on is nothing that we all don't know. If you try to do too many things, you're not going to do them all well. But it does give me some strategies on how to avoid straddle strategy. And it gives me a framework in which to think about it. If we continue to say yes to doing too much, then in essence, we are allowing others to make choices for us, and we're not keeping a narrow focus on the particular solutions that we want to focus on. And I'm just going to leave that there. Essentialism, great book. This is, I believe, my last substantive slide, Brian. And I would really love to see more societal awakenings relative to animals. Within the United States and Canada, we have seen a very good practice where institutions and individuals and corporations have been acknowledging the land and the property and the heritage that has been taken from indigenous populations within those two countries. And you might start a meeting or you might go to a website, and that is firmly acknowledged there. At the same time, there is a public acknowledgement. Black Lives Matter, right? Black and Brown Lives Matter. These public acknowledgements and these focused awakenings that are happening in the public sphere, I applaud those. I do think that in the future, we may want to consider the same types of public statements, the same types of boldness, the same types of courage around speaking about habitats, speaking about environments and ecosystems and individual animals. One of the things that has happened in the past, and it's still continuing to happen, is if you care about animals, you're dismissed as being overly sentimental. I hope that within this presentation that I've outlined some severe problems with our relationship with animals and why it's not just a sentimental issue. That was solved in philosophy in the 70s, with Peter Singer and Tom Regan. That's old news. We need to be focusing more, looking at what some of our current philosophical scholars are doing, what our colleagues are doing in the philosophical world. We need more best practices. We need examples of where animal tourism is being done well. We absolutely need to push back on these multilateral guidelines that aren't going far enough. These are all solutions, I think, that we can take on collectively to rethink our relationship with animals. And let's take a look at some of our old sustainable tourism models, like community-based tourism. In theory, community-based tourism is a great approach. How can we refine it? How can we make it better? I love partnering outside of tourism. It's exciting, it's invigorating, and particularly, I think there are just some amazing new scholars that are coming up and out, and we need to give them amplification and get out of their way. But I also say, let's not forget the independent scholars, because just because they're not tied to an institution, an academic institution, there's some amazing work out there. They should not be dismissed. I'm thinking of, in particular, Kim Stallwood and Carol Adams do some really great work around animal ethics. And in the future, I hope that we take on more of the non-Western view. A lot of the animal ethics and philosophy and tourism contexts and scenarios and best practices, it's still within that Western view. Bob Fisher is someone, I'm trying to hold up a book of his. Bob Fisher is a contemporary ethicist who writes about animals. And he and I wrote a paper recently about non-moral values and basically how to think about what motivates people around animal experiences that might not necessarily be tied to ethics. We talk a lot about Kant. We talk a lot about Descartes. We talk a lot about Aristotle and Socrates, but there's some really good contemporary philosophers. Bob and I based our paper around an approach of Susan Wolf, for example, appealing not to people's grand, ethics, but meeting them where they are and trying to discover what are the values that drive them to have animal-based tourism experiences, and then seeing how we could meet them where they are to influence their behavior around animal-based tourism. And, finally, I think we just have to keep having a impatient patience. These changes aren't going to happen very quickly. However, we do need to be impatient about it because of these existential crises that are all convoluting on us. The public health, the nationalism, the climate change, of course, all of these things are coming together. Animals can be seen as right in the center of them. It is a wicked problem. And so I hope that everyone on this call and so many others around the world will continue to take on their piece of the solution until we can get it at bay. So I'll stop there, and timing wise, how did I do, Brian?
You did perfectly. And thank you very, very much, Carol, for that really enlightening talk with plenty of shiny ideas there. Fabulous. So what I'd like to invite you to do, please, Carol, is to, if you stop sharing your screen, that would be great, because, yeah, I can see everybody on the call here now. So we can have a discussion now, and I can see people who might just want to raise a hand and ask a question. So we've got some time for some questions now, if you're happy to do that, Carol.
Or if they just want to say hi, like, hi, Claire.
Just we want to say hi, or tell us about how they're related into how they're into animal.
That would be amazing.
And give some of our own stories as well. It doesn't have to be a case of grilling Carol, although that does, that
it's
is
fun.
Possible. That is possible. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fun in an academic kind of way, right? what we do for recreation.
It's what we do. Yeah, we are effectively targets for people to throw things at, aren't we? Conceptually, of course. Anybody would like to give a make a start and ask Carol a question or come in with some observations?
Or tell me what you're working on.
Yeah, I may have some observations. I thank you very much, Carol Kline. That's really interesting. Yeah, and I think what you're saying is true. I am from West Africa. Didn't grow up in the West, so I definitely see the difference. I mean, growing up, meat was delicacy. It was like luxury, and even when we did have meat, we would have it. It would be like roughly 5 to 10% of the food, like a tiny little piece, like not even up to the size of a fist, just maybe half. And then the rest of the food will be vegetables, proteins, and all the carbs. And so we ate meat. But when I came here, I noticed that people will sit down and have a whole meat dinner, like say meat, meat, meat. And I didn't really understand. And so I understand that there is an issue here with the demand for meat. And I do agree. But with regard to tourism and traveling, I do also appreciate the fact that not all cultures have the Western mindset around meat. Until I came here and really understood the problem with me, I didn't feel any kind of thing. But I inclined to think that if I were to go to somewhere and I know the ethics around me was different, I wouldn't feel that there was a problem. But that said, I do think there is an issue with consumption here. But the little problem I have with the movements, which have been great, by the way, the move for climate and all of that, and meat have been great. I've been greatly and positively impacted by that, by learning about what is happening. But I do feel that we use too much of the stick approach. I think it should be a good, nice blend of carrot stick. I think just as you said, Carol, a lot of it has to do with psychology. And the more you tell someone, not just child psychology, but also adults, the more you tell someone, don't do this, you're telling them to do it more. And so with this whole movement, the important thing is to help people understand and not feel threatened and accept that this is a problem. But by going only with the stick approach, then what happens is that people withdraw without thinking from the movement, even though deep down they agree. But they feel that the sacrifice is too much. And so they step out because they can't see themselves, giving up meat. And so I would think that a good approach is a way of rewarding little efforts, and I would say eating meat is not the primary issue, but it's the quantity we eat as a society. And maybe I would personally think drawing more attention to the effects of meat to the health, the idea that people say gives them protein and all of that, but especially in cultures like Western cultures that people suffer a lot from obesity, helping them understand that protein also gets converted into glucose and can convert into fats in the blood, in the body. And that is not only sugar, it's carbohydrate as a source of fat, and too much protein as well. And so one of the reasons why we might be getting too fat is that we might be fooling ourselves into thinking we're not eating sugar, but we're eating way too much meat. So that too isn't getting burned. And also, one other problem I found is that with the meat, the vegan meat industry, I tried to go vegan. I have actually been vegan since March. I just decided to give it a go, see how it goes. It's been okay, but I discovered that the options on the counter are worse. Worse than meat. They have way too much carbohydrate, way too much, too refined, high glycemic index, raised insulin level, and it's not as good as meat. And so that too is not the best. I think the best option is moderation. But I do understand that when you're an activist, you want to hit for the highest demand, so that even if you get a bit of a response, at least you want to go for the highest demands just to make sure you're covered. So yeah, these are my remarks, and I do feel that there is a problem, and I appreciate the move, and I think moderation is the answer, and not banning meat. I don't think it's possible. Yeah.
Caroline, thank you so much for those comments. Such great breadth. And Brian, I think, Caroline, you might want to consider Caroline for a talk one day, because that was amazing. Thank you for the nod to the psychological components of it. I agree with you 1,000% regarding, not telling people what they should be doing, because that's only going to make them want to do it well. I mean, absolutely. Your comment, your last comment about activists wanting to sort of hit the highest and biggest, wanting to have the highest and biggest impact. I know some activists are absolutely take on that approach. I do know other activists who are okay with more of an incremental approach. And so I think not all vegan activists want people to stop eating meat, but perhaps just to eat less meat. I think there's diversity in all of those groups. I loved your comments, and I'm so glad you were here today.
Yeah, I think another thing too can be like looking into the importation of more vegetables, as in leaves for iron, because I know people eat meat for iron, and I noticed that we have in the UK only kale, spinach, and a few other leaves, but compared to where I come from, there is a lot of vegetable. Like the variety is just too much. You would never miss your iron complements just because you didn't eat meat. There's just so much. I think one problem here might be with the variety, maybe importing different types of vegetables and trying to encourage people to try different types of food can really like reduce this excuse of iron. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, I think in the case of the UK, we need to go back to some of our old vegetables, the vegetables we used to grow, and which were good sources of iron and other minerals and vitamins. Carlos, you've had your hand up for a while, so over to you. Have you got a question for us?
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. Well, greetings from Mexico. And Carol, thank you very much for this thought-provoking lecture. I've been doing research in Mexico on horses in tourism and leisure. And my research and that of others has revealed that horses, unlike other non-human animals, are signified, valued, used and treated differently as compared with many other animals. For example, there's evidence that human and horses relationships are more intimate and more effective, and therefore they are treated differently, right? So bearing this in mind, I would like to ask you whether, do you think we as researchers should adopt specific theoretical, philosophical, or ontological perspectives depending on the particular animal we are focusing on, or whether there is a more general perspective from which we can depart as we are working with animals as a species? Thank you, Carol.
Oh, thank you, Carlos. That's an amazing question. I'm glad you asked it. I wish you had asked something a little bit easier, but that was a fantastic question. I think you raise a very amazing point, that each species is going to be, each species, each nationality, each region is going to have different nuances and different personalities and different collective knowledges. And yes, I'm talking about the non-human animals. So I love your approach or your question and I'm assuming it's your approach that we use different theological and philosophical and ontological approaches depending on which species, which type of animal we're working with. Is that what you feel we should do as well?
Well, yeah, I think so. The problem, though, is that it's which perspective we should consider, and also considering the conceptual and the theoretical development of each. In this case, in Mexico, for example, where, as you said, there are just recently very few studies and researchers who have started these general discussions, and we have adopted well, knowledge and theoretical positions from the global north that have been useful to some extent, but face the great challenge of the cultural norms in Mexico. Particularly, I'm talking about horses, right? Horses have been very important for societies in the world, but particularly for Mexico, for agriculture, transportation, work, leisure recently, sport. Horses are a core element of the national sport, and also for racing. And I think that and also for national identity. So the conceptions of animals and therefore how we should focus them has been a challenge, at least for me. Right, I have adopted some perspectives from the global north, but suddenly they seem not to fit entirely into the cultural understanding and meanings of animals in Mexico. But that's what I meant. Thank you, Carol.
No, thank you. That's fantastic. I want to learn more about that from you. I want to read your work.
Yeah, I think that's interesting indeed. Yeah, and I mean, it got me thinking, and that the UK and France, you would think were very culturally similar, but we have very different views on horses when it comes to eating them. And in Britain, we had a scandal a few years ago of finding a horse meat in the beef food chain, and particularly horse meat turning up in frozen lasagnas in the supermarkets. And I think the Britons were as much appalled about the cross-contamination of different food streams, and how easy that could happen within the meat production industry, but also the fact that it happened to be a horse, because of course horses are our friends. They're the animal that many little girls want to ride, and so on and so on, and it becomes a very different prospect when you're thinking about horses as compared to cows. But I don't know why that should be, because in many other terms, horses and cows are very similar creatures. We seem to have lost our speaker, which is never a good thing to happen. So unless anybody knows any jokes or anything to bide the time, I think this may be a time when we can draw this to a close. I'm just waiting to see if Carol manages to duck back in again, come back in, but it might be that her Wi-Fi has let her down. Oh, we thought we'd lost you, Carol. We've lost your audio. Oh, you're on mute.
Okay, I'm back. I don't know what happened, but I'm really glad to be back.
I thought we'd lost you and we were just about to close down matters, but we're glad you're back because it means we can have a question or two more. Has anybody got anything more Maggie, I see that hand.
I don't usually leave a meeting so abruptly. I usually say goodbye or thank you or
yeah, we wondered if we'd said something,
I'm glad you came back. Thank you, Carol. As always, I always enjoy your work, and it's always thought-provoking and gets you thinking. And for days to come, I'll be questioning my interactions and engagements with animals. I know I will. I'm wondering, at the conversation, and you dipped out a little bit as Brian was talking, but it kind of links to Carlos's point in the sociocultural context of the way we understand animals, but also around the intelligence of animals. It seems like people almost, and this may be a coping mechanism, and that dissonance process of, oh, I can use an animal for my leisure or my pleasure because it's not that smart or it has less intelligence. And I wondered if you'd come across anything looking at the way humans engage with animals based around that intelligence. I think about donkey rides versus elephant rides, or even the domesticated process of horses, which kind of links back to Carlos' comment, is how we're okay to domesticate certain animals, and by domesticate, really break them until they're domesticated. Right. So it's kind of an awful process in general as well. So I'm just curious about that intelligence factor in there.
Yeah, so thanks, Maggie. Your question makes me think about intellectual intelligence. It makes me think about emotional intelligence in the emotional lives of animals. And it makes me think about sentience, the ability to suffer. And I can't say that, no, there's nothing being said about that within tourism at all. There is, but so much more is being said outside of tourism. And that's why I like continue to encourage people to go outside of our discipline. So I have so many thoughts going on in my head. I'm having trouble, like focusing them. I'll say this, about 7 years ago, when I saw the age of 50 coming at me, I had like a little mini midlife crisis, right? This existential crisis. And it was about how I haven't really done anything regarding animals in my career, and I wanted to do more with animals. And so what I started doing was attending animal studies conferences, animal philosophy conferences. The Oxford Center for Animal Ethics has a summer school. There's so many different types of animal related conferences, Facebook groups, obviously books and ways to hear more about emotional intelligence, intellectual intelligence, sentience. And that's what I started doing. I didn't find what I needed within the tourism literature. And so while I think the tourism scholars who write about animals are amazing, and I'm so glad like Claire Whedon was on this call. She's doing some great work. Catherine Dashper. I mean, like I can't name all of the people who are doing great animal work within tourism. I still like looking outside of our own discipline to take on those really interesting and tough perspectives on animals as well. And then again, going back to what Carlos said, it's going to differ around species. There's something that is acknowledged within the tourism literature, is that animal continuum, about how we treat certain animals differently, and how some animals are made for eating and some animals are made for riding, and some animals are just annoying because they bite us, like insects. And there's this whole continuum. Some are charismatic, some are cute, some are ugly. And so I think, just to take your question and go, even broader, there's a lot of work out there that's fascinating about animals. I'd love to see that work brought into tourism more.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks. That's really interesting.
I like what you were saying there about some animals are ugly and some animals are, just annoying, and some animals are, I'm thinking, so that's some people, isn't it, really, as well?
You said it, I didn't.
I'm thinking, which of those is me? Probably all of them. So, yeah, any one last question, maybe? Have you still got time, Carol, for us? Mm-hmm. Yeah, lovely. Anybody else got another question?
looking for a hand. I'm going to make sure everybody's got a chance. I guess I'll allow myself then a final question, and that is about you were talking about TripAdvisor and Airbnb and all those people putting in new animal programs and things like that. And I have to my own view is I'm a bit suspicious of them, because I think they're a means of trying to capture the conversation and turn it towards their own more commercialized and perhaps less ethical viewpoints. Would you share my concern? Or
could you say that again, Brian?
I'm a bit concerned about, organizations like TripAdvisor and Airbnb, some of these organizations that haven't always had the best ethical basis to them. You might say they're jumping aboard the bandwagon and embracing animal concerns. And I just wonder if they're trying to capture the conversation a bit, trying to steer it towards their own aims.
I totally understand what you're saying, and I do share that concern. I don't think they go far enough. There are examples on TripAdvisor, for example. I don't want to demonize them. There are examples on certain platforms where you can't buy tickets to a dolphin show anymore. However, dolphin shows are still rated and allowed to be commented upon. So it's not like you're banning their presence on your platform. You're just not engaging in the ticket selling. I think there are a lot of examples like that, that are sort of little bites, or policies that don't have a lot of teeth, that are a nice incremental step. But I sure would like to see things go a lot farther and be bolder. Yeah,
I suppose my concern is that their reason for doing it might, we might think, oh, they're just doing little things because that's all they can do, and they're just trying to nibble away at the edges. But I'm worried that it might be more sinister than that, and what they're trying to do is to creep in there and do some work around that, nudging these conversations so that they play into their hands, and they take the conversation away from where it should be, where it's going to actually make a difference.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. So it's even more than just sort of a greenwashing, saying you're doing a lot, but doing a little bit. It's actually deliberately trying to turn people's heads.
Yeah.
Well, I think you should write a paper on that.
I wonder if I should, because I think it happens quite a lot. I think people I won't get political now, but there is a view that some politicians aim to look incompetent, so that they can get the public sympathy, and but actually they're very, very clever, and actually they're working, what they're doing behind the scenes is quite manipulative and quite, holding on to power and so on, and they've got a very different public persona to the private one that's actually driving their decision making. And I just wonder whether that's sometimes happening in the social media these days, and whether animals end up forever always, because they literally don't have a voice. They end up being I hate to say it, the scapegoats.
Yeah, and that was bad. That was a really bad joke.
Sorry about the pun there, but yeah, they end up, they can't complain, so they end up taking the brunt of our decisions in the tourism scape.
I agree.
Yeah, that's a happy note to end things on, isn't it?
Well, I'm excited about this series. Like I said, I have listened to the other speakers, and I can't wait to listen to all of the ones coming up.
Indeed, and I just want to say thank you very much for your incredibly insightful and enlightening talk today. And I know that in the chat, a lot of people are thanking you. So have a look in the chat before we sign off, and see how much people have appreciated it. I certainly have. Thank you for agreeing to be part of our series, Carol. And it's been really good. And I hope that people will now continue this conversation by contacting you. You've given your details, and also by we will all hopefully continue to be parts of forums and so on to keep moving this agenda forward, because I think it's a neglected one and it's a very important one, and one I am personally invested in as well. So
that's great, Brian. Yeah, and I do see, on that note, I do see more and more presentations and tracks being devoted to animal justice and issues on animals. So I do hope anyone who is interested in this topic will contact me just to continue the conversation. And I'll look forward to reading that paper that you're going to write.
I look forward to reading it too. So finally, a big up to Fanimal. Just anybody who wasn't here at the start, Fanimal.online is Carol's organization that she's set up to promote knowledge and understanding about animals and our relationship to them as humans. So Fanimal.online is worth a visit. And this talk will be available on our website, our YouTube site, CVER Swansea. Okay, I'll end it here. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us, and have a nice rest of your day. And Carol, we'll say goodbye, and I hope we'll